Welcome to Now for Someone Completely Interesting. I'm your host, Ben Poulin. Quiet, reserved, polite, maybe a bit unassuming. Some of the words that came to mind when I first met my guest here with me today. I've known Stephen Lind here for quite a few years. I met him the way I meet a lot of people I know. I sold him a truck.
That's right.
I think I sold your parents a couple vehicles too
Yeah.
here. So little by little over the years, we've gotten to know each other. Some small talk here and there at the dealership. And two things in particular about Stephen that I find completely interesting. Number one, his profession. And number two, what I think should also be his profession. Stephen's local business is Northern Lights Honey, which keeps him busy as a beekeeper. But there's also his incredible talent as a classic pianist. And so, am I saying that right? As a
Yeah,
classic?
sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You have to be careful with that word,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So definitely, thanks so much for agreeing to do this.
Oh, thanks for thinking of me.
Thanks for also inviting me into your home. Beautiful location in the Stony Lake area where the view is incredible. And we chose by design the specific room in your house that happens to have a piano sitting next to us. So we might hear.
Yes, my favorite room in the house where I spend all my time.
And we're going to find out why. And so let's go, first of all, on the beekeeping side of this. Is that the right terminology, beekeeper?
Yep, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's or apiarist. Or
Right. Okay. We were
bee
talking.
farmer. It's all fine.
All right. We were talking about it earlier, and my wife says, "No, there's a technical term. I think it's arborist." I said, "No, that's the guy that cuts down trees or trims trees there." So, okay, not an everyday job that a lot of people have, but definitely one that's around here. How do you get into something like that?
Well, my parents started the farm in the 70s, so that's basically how I got
Right.
into it. So I grew up with the bees. I grew up working in the bee yard and everything. Wasn't until I was quite a bit older that I decided that I wanted to do it. Right.
Right.
I mean, when you're growing up, things always seem greener on the other side of the fence. That I wanted to do something else, but it's a really great job.
I was thinking about it earlier. It's kind of interesting. I know a lot of people that have grown up with their parents owning a business and they go on and do something. It used to be quite common that whether you wanted to or not, you took over the parents' business.
Right.
So it's definitely not as common anymore. Other than the fact that you grew up around the business and there's a lot of I guess support around the area because we do know of other beekeepers and bee farms there that are fairly local here. Was there any other supplementary education that you had in there as far as like either ecological sciences or anything like that, or is this just kind of all industry knowledge?
It's all just industry knowledge and experience. So growing up, being around my parents, working with the bees and being around it. I mean,
Right.
that's really the only way you can learn it.
So Northern Lights Honey, like, and as far as these go, start to finish is not just taking care of the bees, but it's harvesting the raw material, making.
Yeah. So like we're a honey producing apiary, right?
Okay.
So there's different ways that you can run bees. You can do pollination, where people pay you to put your bees on their crops to pollinate, like canola. But there's not a lot of that here. That's mostly down in southern Alberta.
Right.
But our area here is a really, really fantastic honey producing area.
Now, I've always heard, I guess, the different types of flowers that bees pollinate with creates, I guess, different types of or flavors of honey.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
What do you find most of your bees around here are
well, the main honey sources in Alberta, a bit like here, it's canola. But we try to target alfalfa. We
Okay.
really like the alfalfa honey, and there's clovers, there's wild clovers and different flowers like that. They make a really, really light colored honey. They call it water white.
Okay.
And it's very sweet. I mean, honey is sweet, but
Mm-hmm.
but like a darker honey will have kind of more of a bite to it, or a
Right.
bitter taste. Like a dandelion honey will be quite dark.
Okay.
But we sort of we put our bees on the alfalfa and the clover.
How do you get the bees?
Well, that's
it's
the
not
thing.
like herding cattle, is
No,
it?
and you can't just tell the bees, well, don't go on the canola field, right? And there's nothing wrong with canola honey, and we make lots of canola honey as well. But
Right.
The thing with alfalfa is that it doesn't get sprayed.
I see. Okay.
And so we sort of like to target that. And like I say, you can't tell the bees not to go to the canola, but the bees instinctually they prefer these clovers and alfalfa. So if you have them on 300 acres of alfalfa, they're going to ignore the canola as long as that alfalfa is secreting nectar.
Right. I think it was a conversation we had at one time. There was a bit of how do I word this? A trend where people were starting their own little mini beehive farms and stuff like that. And I guess the idea was, well, we know how important bees are to the ecosystem as far as, with the pollination and everything like that. If we lose bees, we could lose our crops and food source globally. Is that something that's had a positive effect on?
Yeah, that's so there's a lot more awareness about bees now and how important they are and the problems that have come up in the last few decades with bees. And so you're right, there's a lot of people that are getting into it as a hobby. The problem with that is if you're not educated on the diseases and the parasites that bees can have, you can be thinking you're doing well for the environment, but you're actually putting other bees in the area at risk.
Right.
So if you have 5 hives and you don't know about varroa mites, for example, and you're not treating for varroa mites, bees can fly with, they're not cows. You can't just fence them in.
Right.
So if I have a yard of bees even 5 miles away, you can be spreading mites to me or other beekeepers or other wild bees as well. So It's really important to take a course or go work for somebody for a certain period of time before you just jump in and buy your bees.
Right. How does it work on the winter side of things? Do the bees hibernate, or I'm sorry, I clueless on this.
They don't necessarily hibernate, they're awake.
Right.
But they're in somewhat of a dormant state.
Okay.
So by the end of fall, all those summer bees that made all the honey and they were these beautiful big strong colonies, those all die.
Okay.
And then so each hive has a queen.
Right.
She's solely responsible for reproducing of that hive. So if she goes sterile or gets eaten by a bird or any number of things, that hive is no good.
Right.
Unless you can requeen it or so in the fall that queen, she'll lay out a whole pattern of eggs of winter bees, and they're actually physically different from the summer bees. They have more fat,
right,
and they live a lot longer. Summer bees, I think they only live for 2 weeks because they literally fly themselves to death gathering it's sad, but they live the best life. They're out flying and gathering nectar. They're not clustered inside in 40 below.
Right.
But they fly themselves to death gathering honey. It's unbelievable.
And this is something I didn't know. What happens? Do you just have to how do they regenerate? But so you're saying basically
constantly that queen is laying eggs and raising new bees and regenerating new bees. So the queen is everything. If she can't lay out new cluster, it'll go from, you'll see this beautiful hive full of 10,000 bees, and in a week or two they'll just be gone.
Right. So are these hives during the winter, are they stored somewhere that's got a little bit of heat retention, or are they basically out in...
Mine are all outside. So there's a couple different ways. There's 1,000 different ways of keeping bees. And you'll talk to different beekeepers in Alberta, and everybody does it a little bit different. Which part of what makes it really interesting too.
Yeah, for sure.
But a lot of guys winter inside, but you need quite a facility for that. The problem with it isn't what you might think. It's at this time of year when it starts to warm up, the heat that the bees are generating in that building, they'll cook themselves. So you have to have really good ventilation.
Right.
So if it starts to climb to +5 or higher, you may have to just move all those bees out.
Right.
And if it's going to be 20 below the next day, you don't want them out. They're totally unwrapped. They're vulnerable. So I winter all mine outside. I don't have a big fancy indoor wintering facility. So what we do is we wrap them in insulation. Like we have, they're on pallets, 4 hives to a pallet.
Okay.
We push them in close and wrap them up with insulation. So there's 4 hives inside that insulation heating that.
Okay.
And you'd be amazed the heat that they produce in there. I mean, obviously hopefully they survive the winter.
I guess you're about to find out this time of year, right?
Well, I've already found out.
Right.
I've been around, and it was a tough winter. It was a really tough winter for everybody in the bee business, I think,
right,
that I've spoken to. And it wasn't the cold, it was the varroa mites last fall that we had. Well, as you know about the drought last year, it really affected the bees in a negative way. Like, it affected the crop because the alfalfa, the flowers don't produce nectar if they're in like stress mode, right? But it also, the varroa mites, something about the long, hot, dry conditions was perfect for the varroa mites to multiply. And they really got out of control for a lot of people in the fall. So there were heavy losses, as far as I know, with everybody all over, even in the States.
So how do you recoup from that? Is there something the hives instinctively, like the queen will instinctively do, or?
Well, there's lots of different treatments for these mites that we have to run around and do. Like when I was a kid, varroa mites weren't a thing in honeybees. You didn't have to worry about it. And now it's the biggest thing in the bee industry that threatens our industry. There's multiple treatments for this stuff, but like it costs you money. Like I say, when I was a kid, mom and dad never had to do that. Yeah. So now I'm spending, I don't know, 2 or 3 extra months of work to try to keep this under control, and losing way more bees. Because the treatments can only be so effective. They're dependent on weather. They're dependent on all types of different things. So
that's a point. Like you said, your parents never had to worry about this. So we had talked a little bit earlier about this before we started recording this, and you had said the way your parents ran the bee business compared to how you run it now, it's constantly changing. Is it because of stuff like this, or is
absolutely?
What other factors are different now from when?
There's other diseases. There's things like that, but it's mainly the varroa mites.
Right.
And a lot of the reason they become such a problem is because of the way people commercially keep bees. I mean, it's our fault as beekeepers. With pollination, like in BC, where they pollinate the blueberries and things like that, every beekeeper in BC is all in the same orchard.
Right.
So if somebody has varroa mite levels that are out of control, you can see that it could spread very easily. And then those people, so that they don't stay in the blueberry orchard, they get paid to leave their hives there to pollinate the fruit, and then they move somewhere else for a honey crop. So the first time that mom and dad had varroa mites was because someone had moved over here from pollination and brought them to us. And they lost 70% of everything that winter, and it's devastating. It's really hard to build back from that. Yeah. But you basically you have to take whatever hives you have left, and take care of them and make sure they're healthy. And once they're strong enough, then you can do what's called a split. So you take some of the eggs and some of the larvae that hasn't hatched out yet out of a really strong hive, and you put that in a new whole box, completely separate, and you make it queenless. So there's no queen in there. It's just, I don't know, a pound of bees and some eggs and larvae ready to hatch out. Right. And as soon as you remove them from that other hive, they've lost the smell of their queen. So that puts them in a place that they're willing to accept a new queen. Okay. So like if you bought a queen and you threw it in there, they'll roll her in a ball and they'll kill her. Right. So you have to set the stage, make them willing to accept a new queen. And then when you put her in there, we put her in a wooden cage that it's like a candy in a hole that they'll chew their way. And by the time they've chewed through that candy, hopefully they're accustomed to her pheromones.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you never know what's going to happen in a day of work at the bee yard.
I know. I mean, I only allot so much time for these podcasts, but we might have to do a whole other one just on,
In the bee yard next time.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. So part of your product too, which I was very happy to learn. One of my favorite places, local businesses, is Lakeland Brewing Company. So
Yes.
they have the honey brown ale, which
Yeah.
features Northern Lights honey. As far as that, is that something you do a lot of with, I guess, other business collaborations, or you more?
Not a lot. I know that Colin had approached me and he wanted local honey for his beer, and I like his beer, so
There you go.
it was perfect trade for me.
Right.
I'll usually trade him a few pails of honey for a few bottles of beer. It's my favorite customer. So
There you go.
but no, mainly like, so I'm part of the Alberta Honey Producer Cooperative.
Okay.
Otherwise, like it's bee made. So
Right.
if you're in the grocery store and you see bee made honey on the shelf, that's our cooperative. So it's a lot of different beekeepers in Western Canada that are all part of it, and we all ship to it, and it gets packed and sent all over the world.
Something new I came across this summer was at a farmer's market out by Seba Beach. There, on the far end of Lake Wabamun. There was a guy there selling mead, and there's a meadery in, I want to say it's like in Caroline, Alberta area. Is that something that you can?
I've thought of it, and you know, I think that my dad dreamed of doing that.
Right.
But it's a whole other business, and I mean the bees already. It's such a big undertaking.
And so, okay, yeah, we talked a little bit about this too. So do you have to have like start to finish the bees, the honey, and the meadery all kind of
As
under
far
one?
as I'm aware, when
Okay.
I looked into it, there was a requirement that you had to have, I think, 250 or more beehives.
Wow.
Which isn't that really that much.
Okay.
But you had to have a certain number of hives to qualify to call yourself a
So
meadery.
you can import the honey from another producer and then just
I
have the
don't-
meadery.
Maybe you can make mead, but I don't think you can call yourself a meadery.
Okay.
That's as far as I'm aware.
That might be something I'll have to investigate in. And because the one thing I did do, I did like the mead. So I mean, if you're
it is really good.
Yeah,
It's
if you're getting
become a pretty popular thing.
yeah, if you get into it, I'm gonna be one of your first customers for sure. So, there's a lot more we can talk about, but I have to switch gears a little bit right now because one thing I'm fascinated about, and I've watched videos on your Facebook, your Instagram account. I'm blown away by your musical ability as
Thank you.
as a classical pianist, and I'm telling you right now, and this is, if I was going to pay money for a ticket and go watch someone play piano, and if I was paying a premium, what I would expect to hear is basically what you're performing.
Well, thank you.
So, and I mean, I don't know, like it's impressive blown away. So let's go a little bit about that. Is that something
Sure.
you always wanted to do, or is that something where?
You know, no. when I was a little kid, when I was 3, my mom put me in it, and even before that, I would have been sitting through my older sister's lessons and absorbing things.
Right.
So I have no memories of my life where I wasn't practicing the piano every day.
Mm-hmm.
But once I got older and started to get better at it and realized, hey, I'm kind of good at this, and entered some competitions and things like that, I started to think, you know, maybe I could do this.
Right.
But it wasn't something that I was dead set on until I guess I graduated high school, and I wanted to be an audio engineer, actually.
Right.
So I applied for an Lethbridge had started their audio engineering program that year. It was brand new, and they were building this very expensive studio, and so I applied, and I got in. But when I went to school, the piano professor kind of scouted me out, and he said, "What the heck are you doing in audio engineering? Like, you should be in the piano program."
Right.
And he sort of convinced me to switch over to it, and ended up being a mentor for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up finishing my degree in classical piano.
how long of a program is it to get a degree in that?
Well, it's a 4-year program.
Okay.
It took me longer than 4 years. So really, like with music, the most important thing with the school that you choose is who you're working with, because it's so one-on-one. Like,
Right.
it's not like a science degree where you're in a class of 500 people or something.
Right.
The classes are very small, and then like what they call your studio course would just be your piano lesson, and it's one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more about who you're working with, and Glenn Montgomery was the piano professor there that mentored me, and that's why I decided to stay at Lethbridge. I mean, he was world-class musician there.
Outside of it, did you ever pursue anything with that degree, or?
I did a little bit of teaching to pay the bills during school.
Right.
I mean, that would have been what I would have done with it. That was sort of my plan. I
Okay.
wanted to go to grad school and become a professor.
Right.
But I guess I just found I didn't want to be in school forever, you know? Like, I would have been in school another 10 years, and then I'd be in school the rest of my life teaching.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with teaching, but it just wasn't for me.
Right.
And
I get that.
I was there just to play music. I didn't care about
Right.
the piece of paper or I was just there to play the piano and to learn everything I could from this guy.
So when you think back, all the practicing that you had to do, because you mentioned too, you couldn't watch TV or play video games till you practiced your piano. Let me set the stage a little bit here. I pulled into the yard, and I'm not sure if I'm in the right yard to get out of my Jeep, and I can hear the piano from the yard.
Must be the right place.
Must be the right place. But I mean, you play. You said this is your favorite room. This is where you
Every
play
day.
all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And when did that switch flip for you? I guess when you're not practicing anymore in that sense, because practice.
No, I don't have to.
Practice implies you
unplug
have
the PlayStation or whatever before. No, I come home from work and I come in here.
Right.
You know, I don't really know. I think once you get to a certain skill level, you can play music that's just really interesting. And, I mean, it's not your twinkles anymore.
Have you ever thought of actually? Let me ask this first. Have you? What do you prefer to play? I guess I say classical because that's what I've observed from the videos and stuff like that. Do you have a certain composer that you lean towards, or is there a certain era of music that you prefer?
Yeah, so classical music, it's kind of an
Sorry, you gotta love cats, right?
Yeah, the cat jumping on the piano.
She learned from the best.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt there. Yeah.
What were we...
Sorry, we were the music you prefer to play.
Okay. Yeah, so classical music is kind of an umbrella term, right? And,
okay.
There's so many different kinds of music within that, like Baroque and Romantic music and contemporary, so on.
Mm-hmm.
But mainly, like, a lot of people wanted to play pop music and stuff, and that never appealed to me at all. I always was drawn to classical music, but lately specifically Baroque music and Bach. So that type of music, it's what they call counterpoint.
Right.
So there's polyphony. It's multiple. It's more of a conversation rather than an accompaniment and a melody, if that makes sense.
A little bit. Yeah, no, I get that. I like how you worded it, though, a conversation on the piano. So the question I was going to ask before, though, that too, was, have you ever considered performing even as like, locally? Like there's places that have open nights or they'd invite you in and I guess you could consider it professionally if you had charged a fee or whatever to...
Sure. I mean, yeah, I've considered doing recitals in town and things. I mean, it's tough because, like, if you're a guitar player, you can just show up with your guitar, right?
I guess that's the thing, too,
with
right?
The piano, it's like you get whatever is there. So if you go to play at the seniors, I've played at seniors centers and things like that, and you can hear screws falling inside the piano, and it hasn't been tuned for half a century, and so it's kind of tough that, and even like on the higher scale, like when I was doing competitions and things, and like you'd get to play these pianos that are like $800,000 pianos, and
what makes a piano worth 800,000? Well, I mean, there's lots of things in this world you would ask that question, but
I mean, I've played a lot of $100,000 pianos, which I mean, that's way out of my price range, but I've played quite a few of them, and you think, gee, how much better can and it is that much better.
Yeah.
It's just the way it feels that the keys respond exactly the way you expect. Yeah, I mean, if I had the money, I would buy one.
We'll start a GoFundMe here.
But even that, like, you go to play that competition, it may be $1 million piano or whatever, but you've never played it before.
Yeah.
And every piano is different. So like the university University of Lethbridge is where I went, and they had multiple different practice rooms that they'd give you a key to, and they all had the same Yamaha piano, C3 Yamaha piano. Well, there's I don't know, half a dozen of them, and they're all completely different. There are ones that I would never want to play, and there's ones that I would seek out. So I guess it's because, I mean, it's made out of wood, right?
Yeah.
And it's pretty hard to be consistent with something biological like that. So,
how about the piano sitting in this room?
That piano is from the 60s.
Okay.
It was my mom's piano growing up.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it does the job, I guess. I have a better piano at my parents' down the road.
Okay.
But this is where I sit, and I can play in the middle of the night. I don't have any neighbors to complain.
Would you care to play a little ditty now?
Sure.
Let's give him a taste. Like, I'm not
just a sample.
I don't think I'm overselling this as for how good he is. So here, Stephen, okay, he's just going to pull up to the piano here right now and just
hopefully the cat doesn't
give us a riff. Yeah. Some way, somehow, I'm going to petition Colin Prosney at the Lakeland Brewing Company to have a piano installed. So.
I'll request a Fazioli $800,000 piano, please.
We'll see what we can do. That's amazing, and that's what I was talking about. What was that piece called?
That's Bach. So
okay,
it's a prelude in C sharp major.
Okay.
You can kind of hear how it's a conversation, right?
I was gonna say, yeah. It's
so the left hand isn't just plunking some chords; they're both conversing with each other, and there's more than just the two voices as well.
It sounded more like there was 8 hands playing at once. It's incredible to watch, and that gets. I mean, yeah. If I'm gonna give your Instagram account, Northern Lights Honey.
Yep.
And Facebook as well. You actually have videos of you playing a few different pieces.
Oh yeah, I post there once in a while.
You know what? Yeah, and if you get a chance, go on, check it out, because like this is just a small sample of some of the incredible music stuff that you have. So, thank you so much for doing that. I've had people sing on the podcast. Now I've had an incredible piano performance. Thanks again so much for being a part of this and agreeing to do this? I know you said, yeah, it's a little bit out of my comfort zone, but
For sure, but if you're not putting yourself out of your comfort zone, then you're not doing something right.
there you go. That's a good words of wisdom there. So I know you've listened to a few of these podcasts, so you might have an idea that this question is coming. I like to bring on people that I think are completely interesting to do a podcast, but at one point, a friend of mine says, well, I want to know who they think is completely interesting. So to put you a little bit on the spot, if you had to think of someone who is completely interesting that you would like to hear on this podcast, I'm not saying they would have to come on or anything like that, but just as a conversation piece, and if they did want to, we'd be more than happy to have them. Who would you?
Well, I'm a bit biased, but I guess my parents.
Absolutely.
Their story is incredible. How they started. They started this. Like, I mean, I have to work very hard to keep the business going, but it's nothing. They started with nothing.
Yeah.
I was able to just kind of walk into a turnkey thing. And they started with a truck and a couple $100. So they've got quite a story.
Good. So yeah, maybe tee them up a little bit and see if we can follow up with a podcast with them, because I was actually thinking that that's where you would go with that. Once again, my guest here, Stephen Lind. He has the Northern Lights Honey. You can find them on Instagram and Facebook just by searching Northern Lights Honey. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give us a like, give us a listen, and you can find us on your favorite podcast provider. Like and subscribe by searching Poolin Radio or Now for Someone Completely Interesting. And just like I knew he would be, Stephen Lind was just that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Ben.